Hello, I am Bill Lockwood. Welcome to Patriotic Pulpit. Have you ever wondered why it is so difficult any longer to reason with people on the left? Have you ever wondered how it is so difficult to reason with leftists, even in the churches? And when conservative preachers such as myself make conservative statements, even reflected upon the culture of America, people get all upset. If they're on the leftist, they just get upset and they can't handle it. They go somewhere else. Have you noticed that we cannot even have honest discussions anymore? And why is it that Democrats are so happy to live in a totalitarian state? Have you ever wondered why it is that they allow and want the executive to tell you, that is, the president, to tell you what kind of car you can drive, what you can and cannot eat, whether they want you to have a diet of grasshoppers, whether you can or cannot have property rights, and whether we should sign on to an international government headed by the United Nations? Why is it that Democrats are so happy with the totalitarian state? And why are they so happy with an executive such as Joe Biden, who is obviously mentally challenged? He's obviously cognitively challenged. He's on a downhill slope, but they don't care. As long as he's a breathing bag, they don't care. They're getting their agenda done, apparently. And why is it that the gap is ever widening between conservatives and liberals? Now, some people might want to say, well, that's because the conservatives are going to the right and the liberals are going to the left. That is baloney. That's absolutely, that is sophomoric reasoning. The conservatives today have moved so far to the left that they don't even represent the conservative Republicans of a generation ago or of two generations ago, let alone of the founding era. We have all moved so far to the left. But that's what's happening. But even though the Republicans have been dragged all the way to the left, that is, they're even now endorsing a totalitarian style welfare state, at least to a small degree, the gap continues to widen between the left and the right. Have you ever wondered what is a personality disorder? You know, when I married my wife many years ago, at one point she had worked in a state hospital, and she would refer to people as, well, that individual had a personality disorder. And then she would see someone, and she said, well, that's almost like the personality disorder that I saw in the state hospital. And I thought, personality disorder. So here's an article that I saw that was written by David Kupelian. What a great writer is Kupelian. And he refers to, actually he has in it a discussion by a number of psychiatrists and psychologists who are discussing the leftist craziness and the real personality disorders that they're showing on the left. And this is a discussion that many different psychologists are having about leftist Democrats in America, and explains why we cannot discuss topics with the Democrats, why we cannot discuss any longer, seemingly, with those who are on the left. So the article begins this way. Barack Obama is cited as a perfect example of a malignant, narcissistic personality disorder. There we have it, the personality disorder. The Biden administration, which insists that Donald Trump's reelection would be very bad for America, enthusiastically supports amputating the breast and sexual organs of thousands of troubled children, and is obsessed with ushering as many as millions and millions of illegal aliens, including terrorists, fentanyl smugglers, MS-13 gang members, child sex traffickers, legions of surely military-aged Chinese men, as many as possible into America. And just to pick one of many examples of the bureaucratic insanity, recently demanded, that is the Biden administration, recently demanded via the FAA that the U.S. airlines employ more people, including pilots, with severe intellectual and psychiatric problems. Now let's just stop for a moment and soak that in. We're so consumed, that is, the left is so consumed with what is not even political correctness anymore, just state doctrine, that they're insisting to the endangerment of the American populace that airlines hire people that have severe intellectual or psychiatric problems. And they want to have racial quotas included in pilots. You know what? We're not interested in racial quotas or even sexual quotas as to who's flying the airplane. We want the best qualified. But no, we have to have some kind of balance in here by the quota system. So it's increasingly clear that many Americans, current leaders, are, to put it plainly, this is David Kupelian, I think is exactly right, they're stark raving mad. But stating this is not an exercise in hurling nasty epithets at one's political opponents, as the left does continually. Rather, what follows is a brief but serious look at the proposition that America's current leaders are genuinely insane in a clinically diagnosable way. This is about rampant borderline personality disorder, malignant narcissistic personality disorder, and other scary sounding conditions whose clinical symptom pictures perfectly match many of today's leaders. Now, of course, many cases of what the secular psychiatric world labels mental disorders ultimately boil down to individuals who, one way or the other, have fallen into the grip of dark spiritual forces, and I believe that to be exactly right. And yet it's illuminating to briefly explore how current research in psychiatry, a field ironically dominated largely by the left, nevertheless has concluded that leftist radicals and leftist leaders are more often than not certifiably crazy. And it's almost to a point of laughing at this, but this is exactly where we are in America. For example, in a groundbreaking study published in March 2023, 1 year ago, titled Understanding Left-Wing Authoritarianism, Relations to the Dark Personality Traits, Altruism, and Social Justice Commitment. Now that's the title. I don't know why these doctors have such lengthy titles, but Relations to Dark Personality Traits, that would be enough. Authors Dr. Ann Crispins and Dr. Alexander Bertrams found that left-wing extremism is closely associated with psychopathic tendencies. And here's a quotation from their paper. Narcissistic individuals and those with psychopathic tendencies are more likely to strongly endorse left-wing, anti-hierarchical aggression. Summarize the widely cited PsyPost website, which reports the latest research on human behavior. Again, quoting, individuals with dark personalities such as high narcissistic and psychopathic traits are attracted to certain forms of political and social activism, which they can use as a vehicle to satisfy their own ego-focused needs instead of actually aiming at social justice and equality. Let's just boil that down for a moment. In other words, social justice, which is socialism, which has become the mantra that is taught today, is actually a vehicle to fund their own egocentric, narcissistic personalities. And Kupelian says, stated simply, the left-wing psychopaths pretend to care about social justice and equality, but in reality, they're just feeding their massive ego-focused lust for power, glory, and revenge. And that's according to the authors of this paper. In particular, they add, quote, certain forms of activism might provide them with opportunities for positive self-presentation and displays of moral superiority to gain social status, to dominate others, and to engage in social conflicts and aggression to satisfy their need for thrill seeking. That explains, and you can see that with the leftist on the stage. Likewise, here's retired psychiatrist Brad Lyles, medical doctor, explains the following. One way of understanding the increasingly outlandish beliefs and behaviors of the left is through the lens of borderline personality disorder. There it is. The borderline diagnosis, he notes, is among the most infamous diagnoses in psychiatry. It is the diagnosis that keeps therapists up at night, covered in sweat, fearful of every encounter of this sort of patient. So understanding the long research processes driving borderline personality disorder provides unique insights into processes driving the more extreme politics of the left. And these are the authors of this paper. The borderline model explains not only the often inexplicable behaviors of the left, but also why the left is so legitimately dangerous. And boy, that right there is the key. The most dangerous feature, you can see it all over Biden's State of the Union speech the other night. The most dangerous feature of the borderline model, and the process most dangerous in our politics, is the psychological projection as distinct from the political variety. And what is psychological projection? What is exactly psychological projection? Well, it hardens a patient's mere belief or suspicion that the other person is bad into a conviction that the other person is bad. In particular, the patient knows the other person is bad. And so, for example, they will say that the other side is guilty of thus and so and A, B, and C, and all the while it's they themselves. They are simply reflecting about themselves. So here's a case, for example. Firefighters who booed tyrant Attorney General Letitia James this is the headline, ordered to surrender or risk being hunted down, and they will face punishment and re-education. Now this is the firefighters in New York booing Letitia James, and they also chanted Trump, Trump, and they're trying to ferret them out and discover who they are because they're going to punish them for hollering Trump's name. On the contrary, political projection, accusing the other guy of what you're doing, is merely a strategy. A prominent example would include 3 years Democrats accusing President Trump of what? Colluding with the Russians, while they themselves were in fact colluding with the Russians. Psychological projection is not a strategy, it is a threat. And with psychological projection, there are no gray areas in the belief structure. The other person is all bad. There's no circumstance in which a person or a political party is understood to possess a combination of both good and bad features. And so this all bad belief structure, that's what the late Pulitzer-winning columnist and trained psychiatrist Charles Krauthammer was getting at when he famously wrote this line: to understand the workings of American politics, you have to understand this fundamental law. Conservatives think liberals are stupid. Liberals think conservatives are evil. Of course, it's the same conservatives are evil belief that underlies the left's continual and epically deranged comparison of Donald Trump with Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, hands down the most reviled, genocidal mass murderer in the world history, and yet top Democrat politicians, including Joe Biden, and the mainstream media just fawning over themselves about it, have continually likened Trump to Hitler since before he was elected president in 2016. And it continues today, 8 years later. And yet if Trump is really another Hitler, where exactly are all of his Hitler-like policies and actions? After all, the man was president of the United States, leader of the free world for 4 extremely important years. So what are these evil practices that justify such a comparison? In reality, of course, Trump's policies were right in line with the values and sensibilities of the vast center-right American middle class that has long constituted the nation's moral and economic and spiritual backbone. But I'll tell you what, that is exactly what the New York columnists and the San Francisco Californians, that's what they hate, middle America. But that is exactly what Trump represents. America's economy was stable and strong under Trump. Unemployment was at historic lows. Perverse trade agreements were replaced with fair, pro-American ones. Border enforcement was a priority. America's military was being rebuilt. And the world was free of major wars due to Trump's personal strength and leadership. Meanwhile, the current president, Joe Biden, having degraded and just about destroyed America in every conceivable way, has sunk to the level of a third world dictator by casting hundreds of American patriots into prison, destroying their lives, their families, all for protesting the theft of the 2020 election. That ladies and gentlemen, is Adolf Hitler. That's exactly what it is. And by the way, they are still, the DOJ has actually ramped up the arrests of people who have been involved in January 6th, even they're peacefully singing God Bless America. So, seeing Biden has been the hands down worst administration in American history, but it's not simply a worst administration. It is evil, it is wicked, it is totalitarian, it is a dictatorship. The playbook governing left-wing power politics demands that Trump simply must be Hitler, period, or else the Democrats lose power. That is not an option for them. So Kapelian goes on speaking about the diagnoses regarding Obama. And he says, can all of this really be true? Is it actually possible that many Americans' top Democrat leaders are ruthless psychopaths? Let's rewind a few years, briefly focus on Barack Obama. Since much of today's societal madness began or accelerated because of him, and a great many people believe Obama is calling the shots in Washington, D.C. today, and I am one of those. Of course, Obama's wife, Michelle, is increasingly considered a top contender for becoming the Democrats' presidential candidate later this year. This is kind of interesting to think about. You know, Joe Biden was put into office without even campaigning. He campaigned, I suppose, from his basement, but he didn't even campaign. Just throwing out the window everything about campaigning and gaining momentum. Why is that the case? People ought to ask that question. And so apparently, to vote for a Democrat, it doesn't matter if you campaign. They have this ideology, which is Marxism, and they're going to put a Marxist in there. And so if they change out Joe Biden for Michelle Obama, so be it. Many Americans believe, and some widely respected voices, according to Kapelian, have said publicly that Barack Obama is a sociopath or psychopath. For the record, though numerous psychology articles attempt to differentiate between sociopathy and psychopathy, in the end, the analysis always boils down to the two being essentially the same, psychopaths just being a little worse than the sociopaths. 2016, Dr. Ben Carson referred to Obama on camera as a psychopath. The aforementioned columnist author Charles Krauthammer, a psychiatrist by trade and by training, dubbed Obama a narcissist who talks like an Emperor Napoleon. Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist George Will wrote about Barack Obama's intellectual sociopathy, and so on and on. Closely consider this typical description of sociopathy. Sociopaths are often well-liked because of the charm and high charisma, but they do not usually care about other people. They think mainly of themselves and often blame others for the things they do. They have a complete disregard for rules and they lie constantly. They seldom feel guilt or learn from punishments. Does that remind you of anyone? During the Obama administration, David Kapelian communicated frequently with veteran forensic psychiatrist Lyle Rossiter, who suggested a slightly different diagnosis for Obama, but similar to sociopathy, namely malignant narcissistic personality disorder. Malignant narcissistic personality disorder. The modifier malignant served and signified the version of narcissistic personality disorder that may cross over into criminality, he explained. This is according to Lyle Rossiter. Rossiter, who has since passed away, has been retained as an expert in more than 2,700 civil and criminal cases and was a genuine world-class authority in forensic psychiatry, which is the intersection between criminal behavior and mental disorders. He carefully reviewed with Kapelian a list of some of the major symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder, comparing them with Obama's behavior as president. And here are the few of the key markers. Number one, a grandiose view of one's achievement. You know, everything Obama did was historic. Number two, an utter inability to handle criticism. Everyone criticized Obama or his policies was attacked as an extremist or racist. Number three, lack of genuine empathy. Just one example. Obama gave a televised speech on the day of the Fort Hood terror attack, in which a Muslim U.S. Army major shot 45 Americans, 13 fatally, with the entire nation reeling in total shock and horror. And yearning for strong, reassuring words from their commander-in-chief, Obama instead engaged in small talk and an inane shootout for 2 full minutes before even mentioning that the worst terrorist attack on American soil since 9/11 had occurred just hours earlier. Now let's fast forward to today. From President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, to the presidential cabinet, including, in particular, Attorney General Merrick Garland, Transportation Secretary Peter Buttigieg, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, Homeland Secretary Security Alejandro Mayorkas, Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra. All of these people lie literally all the time. That's what they do for a living. And to all appearances, they do so easily, reflexively, without conflict of any conscience. Even Karine Jean-Pierre, whose daily job is to tell absurd and embarrassingly obvious lies to the nation in order to put on a good face on the most destructive, corrupt, and mentally incompetent president in the U.S. history, not to mention the head of a crime family, has publicly described herself as a historic figure, the first black lesbian ever to serve the White House press secretary. Everything has got to be historic. Democrats are twice as likely as Republicans to be mentally ill, according to psychiatrists. So interestingly, Kupelian points out, it's not just the left's leaders who are mentally ill. Gallup pollsters conducted an extensive study involving more than 4,000 interviews conducted over a course of 4 years, which concluded that Republicans had significantly better mental health than Democrats. Likewise, a SurveyMonkey survey commissioned a few years ago by the left-wing news site BuzzFeed, which has since shut down, found that Democrats suffered significantly more mental illness than Republicans. In fact, Democrats were found to be twice as likely to have been diagnosed with a mental disorder as Republicans in almost every single category, from anxiety, depression, PTSD, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, narcissistic personality disorder. And yet, it is the left that continually accuses Donald Trump and his supporters of being deranged, delusional, engaging in projection, accusing others of the very evil in which they are guilty. Recently, a gender-affirming psychologist by the name of Dr. Harriet Wims gave an extraordinary demonstration of projection, a favorite tactic of the left. At the World Professional Association for Transgender Health's 27th Annual Training Symposium, Montreal, Canada, Wims, who is the clinical director for the Village Family Support Center in Baltimore, Maryland, announced that parents who oppose cutting the breasts and or sex organs off of their precious children have mental illness. I'm going to read that again. Here is Dr. Wims, Harriet Wims, the clinical director for Village Family Support Center in Baltimore, Maryland, announced that parents who oppose cutting breast and or sex organs off of their precious children have a mental illness. This is absolutely stunning to hear. We are upside down in every way that we possibly can be. There's a lot of mental illness in America today. And as mentioned earlier, most serious psychiatric diagnoses in the sociopath, psychopath, malignant, narcissistic arena really amount to very dark and demonic spiritual conditions being described through a secular, non-theistic lens. Meanwhile, the general population sadly includes large and growing numbers of genuine casualties of today's deranged sociopathic leadership, whether in government, education, medicine, culture, especially among the youth, where depression, delusion, anxiety, and suicide are rampant. These are the victims. But as for the increasingly totalitarian ruling elites in the Biden administration, from the let's cut off kids' body parts and engineer a massive foreign invasion of America Biden administration to the let's terrify everyone about global warming and insist they ought to eat insects while we dine on steak globalist crowd, the fact is they are simply evil. Totalitarian evil. We'll be back in a few moments. By now, everyone is surely familiar with the fact that our government has red flagged conservatives via the banking institution. The Treasury Department of the Biden administration red flags conservatives doing word searches in their financial transaction through the banks, looking for words such as MAGA and Trump. What an assault on the Fourth Amendment. Not that we have much Fourth Amendment left anyway. But this is really the mark of a totalitarian government. That's exactly what the Biden administration is doing. They're actually marking conservatives, ferreting them out, trying to search them out, bring them to the J6 type of committee and put them in prison without any hearing. This is absolutely out of control of totalitarian government. It actually is an open-ended search warrant, which was one of the reasons that our forefathers in the nation actually repudiated England and wanted to establish our own nation. Let me just tell you a little story about that. This is regarding James Otis, and it is told by A.J. Langguth in his book Patriots, the Men Who Started the American Revolution. And the story is in Boston at the Boston Town House in 1761. There's a trial that was occurring, and at issue were the writs of assistance. What were the writs of assistance? Well, the king's men would have a search warrant, an open-ended search warrant that were given to all of their officers that would go around the docks at Boston Harbor and in the homes of individuals and in the warehouses and search the ships, search the warehouses, search their homes. And it was a continual search warrant that was an open-ended. They were just combing through, looking for any kind of thing that they might be able to accuse the patriots of. And what were they looking for? What kind of contraband were they looking for? Well, they were looking for molasses. They're looking for tea. And so one warrant that was given to an officer could be used over and over and over again. It was really a wanton exercise of power. And one of the very reasons, one of the sparks that set off the American Revolution was right here. Just like a red flag laws, the red flag laws are the federal judges giving authority to individuals to confiscate firearms from individuals without due process of law. One of the stalwart principles of our Constitution is that a person is innocent until he is proven guilty. And one cannot have an open-ended search warrant or a red flag law saying that if someone tells on me, saying, Bill Lockwood has firearms in his house and we think he's a dangerous individual, and therefore I get a knock on the door at night and they're going to take and confiscate my firearms, that is a totalitarian state. That's a Mao Tse-tung tactic. But that's already going on in this country. But now it's going on with the federal government. But back to the story of James Otis in 1761. So the merchants in Boston, that is the patriots, the people who lived in Boston, were so angry about these search warrants and the king's men coming to every one of their facilities and having this open-ended search warrant that they brought a suit against the crown. James Otis was a lawyer. At the one time, he worked for he was a king's attorney. He was a Harvard lawyer. I think he entered Harvard when he was 14 years old. And so the king's attorney asked him to defend the writs of assistance against the suit that was brought by the patriots of Boston. James Otis refused. He actually switched sides and defended the merchants. His assistant was Oxenbridge Thatcher. And James Otis came to see the climax of the case on a cold February morning in 1761. The Chief Justice at the time was Thomas Hutchinson. He had been appointed by Governor Bernard. The king's attorney now had been appointed. His name was Jeremiah Gridley. And the case went something like this. The king's attorney admitted there was an infringement upon the common rights of Englishmen. but it was needed for order and security. He defended the principle of the search warrant. Now, by the way, let's just stop here and notice this is exactly like the Democrats right now are doing. They say, we know that it is violating the Fourth Amendment, but we want to stop any such thing as an unarmed protest, such as January 6th, where the people are mostly peaceful, and we don't have any more protests like that, people thinking that the election was stolen. So in order to stop that, we need to go combing through all of the records in the banking and financial institutions and discover people who are aligned with Trump. That's exactly what the Democrats are saying. That's exactly what the King's attorney, Jeremiah Gridley, that's what he argued. He said, yeah, it's an infringement of the common rights of Englishmen. Now, according to John Adams, he said when James Otis stood up to speak, something profound changed in America. This is like James Jordan, who got after this case. He's on one of the Congress's subcommittee regarding these things, ferreting out these issues. When James Otis stood up to speak, said John Adams, something profound changed in America. And Otis rose, he said, like a flame of fire in the hall. And he argued, number one, any law was void if it violated the British Constitution, the rights of freeborn Englishmen. Number two, British law was not just what Parliament said it was. Now let's just stop here for a moment. Has the Biden administration violated the rights of American citizens according to the Fourth Amendment? Absolutely. Number two, is American law just what Biden says it is? Absolutely not. That's exactly what James Otis argued. Then this is James Otis, goes back to Cook's compilation of the law, which was written a previous century, and he called upon judges to nullify any act of Parliament that was against the common law or against reason or was impossible to enforce. This is exactly the tack that our Congress ought to take. Senate and the House of Representatives ought to nullify any act of Parliament or any act of the Biden administration that is against common law or against reason or is impossible to enforce. Because combing through the records and bank records of individual private citizens, violation of the rights that we have before God. So then John Adams said this regarding James Otis. He said, James Otis soared beyond that argument. James Otis argued that every man lives in a state of nature. Every man is his own sovereign, subject to the laws engraved on his heart and revealed to him by his Maker. No other creature on earth could legitimately challenge a man's right to his life, his liberty, or his property. And that principle, that unalterable law, took precedence over. And here Otis was answering Jeremiah Gridley directly. That unalterable law took precedence over even the survival of the state. And then Otis issued a guarded warning to the new king. The writs of assistance represented a sort of destructive and arbitrary use of power that had cost one king his head and another one his throne. Ladies and gentlemen, that's exactly the position that American patriots find themselves in right now. You know, the New York Times tells us that the middle America, that's the enemy of America. Middle America, that's where we are. That's where I am right now. And so they are taking single-handedly, destroying the rights of individuals which have been enshrined for us in the Bill of Rights and the Fourth Amendment. Federal investigators have asked financial institutions to use search terms such as Trump and MAGA when combing over customer data in the aftermath of January 6th Capitol riot, Jim Jordan has revealed, and he revealed this in January. But the request came from the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Network, according to documents that were obtained by the House Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Federal Government. The panel, headed by Jordan, demanded testimony from the agency's former Strategic Operations Division Director, Noah Bischoff, as a part of a probe into what the Ohio Republican called an alarming case of pervasive financial surveillance, seemingly conducted on the basis of protected political speech. Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly what's happening. The Biden administration is acting like King George III and having open-ended search warrants, writs of assistance that are given via the Treasury Department to comb through my bank records, to comb through all my financial institutions, and find out that if I have somehow supported Donald Trump or supported MAGA or any kind of search word that they might use to find out if that I'm a conservative. This is absolutely a totalitarian state. That's where we are living. And if something is not done quickly, and I mean quickly, then we are losing and we have lost our country. I worry about the next election. We already have a totalitarian regime set in Washington, D.C. Joe Biden administration, before that the Obama administration. The Democratic Party basically is the socialistic Marxist Party of America, and they want total, absolute control. Whether it means stealing election or doesn't mean stealing election, whether it means searching out anybody who's a Trump supporter, whether it means taking Trump to trial and trying to make him so he's ineligible to run. Look what's happening across our country. If Trump is elected, I predict that there will be violence coming from the left. We have absolutely come into a different phase of America. It's time for Americans to stand up against these open-ended writs of assistance that are given by Joe Biden through the Treasury Department to search out anybody who has political speech that is a conservative. If you think that they're stopping because they have been discovered here, you're mistaken. Every avenue to which you look, the same thing is going on. Whether it be the border, Biden's single-handedly violates the laws of the United States, inviting millions of people in here illegally, and just to hurry up the process, 325,000 he's flying in from foreign countries over the border into the states, and they're putting them in conservative states to destroy the electorate of this nation. If we don't put a stop to Biden, and I mean put a stop to him now, and the Marxists that are in control of our government, and the liars of the Democratic Party, we have lost America.